this is the question, right? Well, isn't Hashem everywhere? Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. This is not a Beatles song. So what does it mean when we talk about the Shekhinah? So there are two interesting stories that are told, two Chassidic stories. They could have been with any great rabbis, really. And one of them was, I think maybe it was the previous Rebbe when he was a child, maybe 7 years old, 8 years old. So a chassid came over to him and asked him when he was a child, he was kind of playing with him, a little teasing him. He said, I'll give you a kopek if you can tell me where God is. The previous Rebbe, as a child, as a 7, 8-year-old child, responded immediately, and he said, I'll give you a ruble if you can tell me where he's not. So that's what story number one. Story number two was with the Kotzker, where somebody asked the Kotzker, where is God? And the Kotzker responded, wherever he is let in. Wherever he is let in. Wherever you let him in, that's where God is. Oh my, oh my. So which story is it? So we have, just by way of analogy, and I want to emphasize that this is just as an analogy, that you could be with somebody in a room, but then the person is there, but they're not with you. It's not like they want to be with you. It's not that they, they enjoy, that's where their enjoyment is, that's where their pleasure is, that's where their desire is. They happen to be in the same room as you. And then you have somebody that's face to face, that's the two people are together and they both have the desire to be there. Right? So there are many, many examples of this. You could have somebody sitting at a dinner table on their cell phone, right? I mean, that's a horrific thing, but I'm sure we've all seen it before. Maybe we've even done it. So the person is there, they're there, but they're not there, right? Just again, by way of analogy, we can understand that Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. In fact, as the Zohar puts it, there is no place that is void of him. There's no place where God is not. But now when we're talking about the Shekhinah, we're talking about God's presence being drawn to that space where God desires to be. So does that clarify it for you, Yisrael?
Yes. So a big distinction is also when there's a Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan where there was quote unquote a home for Hashem's presence to reside. So does that mean that his Shekhinah is not readily accessible unless there's a Beis HaMikdash?
So it's a matter of degrees. It's a matter of degrees. So it says that that Hashem's. So number one. Okay, so in the Beis HaMikdash, of course, there you have, so to speak, the mother lode of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, where it's explained that the Shekhinah from the world of Atzilus becomes manifest in the luchot, in the tablets that were in the first temple. And Malchus of Atzilus becomes manifest. Malchus of Atzilus is a very high spiritual level of a spiritual world above and beyond our ability to perceive. And that level becomes manifest within the Holy of Holies, within the Ark, within the Luchot, within the tablets that Moshe gave to the Jewish people, the second tablets, right? The ones that remained intact. So that's an enormous revelation of God. In the second temple, Did they have the ark? They did not. The ark was hidden during the first temple. It did not return. Was the Shekhinah in the second temple? Yes, but to a lesser degree. After the second temple was destroyed, and this is already based on a verse in Ezekiel that God says that I will make for you a migdash ma'at, I will make for you a miniature sanctuary. And those are referring to all of the houses of worship, the bate knesiot, the shuls as we call them today, right? Every shul has an element of the Beit HaMikdash within it, right? And thus the idea of the Shekhinah of Hashem. To the same degree as the Beit HaMikdash? Of course not. Certainly not the same as in the first Beit HaMikdash, not even to the same degree as the second Beit HaMikdash, but in a smaller degree. And then we have in every Jewish home can be made into a sanctuary for Hashem. Then, as is not brought in this Basi Lgani discourse, but in many others, the quote, I think it's from the Shalah, that the heart of any person, anybody who pushes aside the negativity of his heart, his own desires, his own needs, his own selfishness, and makes a place for the service of Hashem. So God says, "V'shachanti b'tocham," I will dwell in amongst them. It doesn't say I will dwell in the temple, but I will dwell in them, b'toch kol echad ve'echad miYisrael, in the midst of every single Jewish person, any Jewish person who makes his heart into a place to hold the divine presence, the Shekhinah.
Does that mean you have to be a Benoni to fulfill that?
No, you can do it right here, right now. And you are, by the fact that you could be out golfing. You could be watching Netflix, or you could be doing something else. And what you desire to do is to take this time.
That's happening at the Mexican border.
To take this time and do what? Study Torah. So you're doing it right now, Yisrael, without even being aware of it. So that is the beauty of V'shachanti b'socham. So we have it on the macro level, of course, in the Holy Temple, but we have it on the micro level, b'toch kol echad ve'echad miYisrael, where God resides within the heart of every single Jew. And this is a story told by a fellow. They have these stories told of people who had experiences with the Rebbe. So there was a fellow who came to 770, a hippie. He was into the whole rock and roll world. He was, I don't know if he was a music, if he was a composer or a manager, whatever it was. But he had some inkling, he spoke Yiddish in home. This is back in the 70s. This is people were speaking Yiddish in the home. And he came to the Rebbe and he asked him in Yiddish, "Where can I find God?" And the Rebbe told him, he said, "I can find him God is everywhere, right? There's no place where God is not." But he said, "No, but Rebbe, where can I find God?" So he said, I think the same words, and the Rebbe said, "If you mean that," so the Rebbe put his hand on his heart and said, "Here you can find God," right? And these are the two different aspects when we're talking about God. On the one hand, we're talking about God, what God is. On the other hand, we're talking about our deep and personal ability to have a direct relationship with God. And that is within our very own heart. So can the Shekhinah reside in our heart? The answer is yes. You need to be a perfect person or almost a perfect person? No. You simply set aside your own thoughts and minds and agenda and say, I'm going to focus now on what Hashem wants. And at that moment, you become a mishkan, you become a dwelling place for the divine presence. You become a merkava, in the words of the Alter Rebbe. You become a chariot. He talks about the forefathers that were chariots, they were vehicles for God's will, but they were always, constantly in that state. But we can be on that state whenever we so desire, when we commit ourselves to doing a mitzvah. We become a chariot for the divine agenda. So, in the Maimer, we discussed the idea of the Iker Shechina, the main level of the Shechina, and this was the way that God was above and beyond. And last week, we were talking about all of the different levels of godliness in the spiritual worlds, and then even before there were spiritual worlds, in the Or Ein Sof, in the infinite light of God, you had already the desire to become manifest in the world. And that is already the Shekhinah. And that level of Shekhinah in the infinite light of God came to reside in this world. So now, to continue in the Maimer, chapter 2, which is on page 3. So it is evident that when the above-mentioned Medrash says that the essence of the Shekhinah was originally found in this lowly world, it refers to this physical world. You see, it doesn't say this lowly world. It says, in the Tachtonim, in the lowest realm. The question is, where is the lowest realm? Well, the lowest realm is this physical realm. Indeed, the Medrash goes on to explain that through the sin of the tree of knowledge, the Shekhinah departed from earth to heaven, and by giving the Torah on Mount Sinai, God returned to his garden, to his bridal chamber. In other words, so the Rebbe is kind of going through the whole thing. With the sin in Gan Eden, the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge, the divine presence departed from this reality. And then ultimately, through the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, God's presence came back down into the world. And the Rebbe explains, just as the sin itself of the tree of knowledge made possible sin in general, for it precipitated and brought about the sins of Cain, of the next generation, and Enosh, of a further generation, as well as later sins, so too with regard to the effect of sin, which is the banishment of divine presence, it was the sin of the tree of knowledge that was responsible for the most significant stage in the departure of the Shekhinah, its ascent specifically from this world. So which sin? The Rebbe is setting up here this is a setup here. We'll see what the point of the Rebbe. But the point right now is, when we talk about the 7 levels of departure of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, which level of departure was the most significant one? You have to unmute if you want to answer the question.
From the physical world?
That's right. So the first level of departure, where God departed from the physical world, now it's just a matter of degrees. From the second to the third, from the third to the fourth to the fifth, etc. But the first level of departure means that God was no longer present in this lowest realm. That is the most significant. That was the most significant sin and the most significant departure. For just as the essence of the Shekhinah was originally found in the lowly world, that is in the physical world, so too the most significant stage in its departure was specifically the move from this world to heaven, to a spiritual state. And this move was brought about through the sin of the knowledge. So it's kind of an interesting thing when we talk about, we read the story in the Torah, we read about God banishing Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. So according to this Medrash and according to the Chassidic insight into it, in a sense, it wasn't so much that God banished Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. According to this reading of it, God banished himself from this world, from Gan Eden, and automatically he was no longer in Gan Eden. In other words, Adam and Eve didn't have to go anywhere. When God banished them from Gan Eden, what that means is that God himself departed from the physical world and it was no longer Gan Eden. It's kind of interesting, a kind of a twist on the way we look at the story. This also explains why the Rebbe of blessed memory does not include the sin of the tree of knowledge together with the other sins that caused the further departure, but lists it separately, because it was the primary sin. For the sins of Cain and Enosh, as well as the later sins, caused the Shekhinah to depart from one heaven to the next, right? I'm assuming everybody's remembering the original point that we made, and I'll just mention it very briefly here. The Medrash says that with the sin of the tree of knowledge, when Adam and Eve ate from the tree, so the divine presence departed from this physical world and went to heaven number one level removed. And then with the sin, when Cain killed his brother Abel, the Shekhinah departed another level. Then in Enosh, another generation, and through ultimately 7 generations, the divine presence departed 7 levels, 7 heavens above this world, like 7 levels of separation, of distance. So he says here that the sins of Cain and Enosh caused the Shekhinah to depart from one heaven to the next, whereas the sin of the tree of knowledge causes departure from the earth to heaven, right? So that was the main departure. Now, apart from the fact that this stage in the distancing of the divine is the one that most affects us in this world, this is also the most significant. And the Rebbe continues his discourse by quoting the conclusion of the Medrash. And he says, thereafter 7 tzaddikim arose, whose divine service drew the divine presence down once more into this world below. Okay? Let's go through the 7 tzaddikim here. So the first one was Avraham. That's generation number 1, or let's call it generation number 7. Then Yitzchok, generation 6. Then Yaakov, generation 5. Now, after Yaakov came, we're going to be, based on the one who we're ultimately getting to, we're going to count Levi as generation 4. Then Levi had 3 sons, and the one who we're going to count is Kehat. They were the ones who carried the holiest objects in the temple. That was generation number 3. And Kehat had a son who you may know his name. His name was Amram. Amram was the second. And Amram had a son who we all know. His son number 3, his child number 3, was Moshe, right? So these are now going to be the generations from Abraham to Yitzchok, and each of these subsequent generations are bringing the divine presence lower and lower, closer and closer to our reality, until finally Moshe was the 7th, although I guess I should have numbered it the other way. Moshe was the 7th, and that's going to be very significant, as we shall soon see. So through the merit of Abraham, the Shekhinah was brought down from the 7th to the 6th, and after abridging the continuation until Moshe, the 7th of these tzaddikim. And the previous Rebbe in his discourse, he quotes the Medrash. This is all based on the Medrash. There's a Medrash, the most famous, the biggest Medrash, the greatest Medrash is called Medrash Rabbah, the great Medrash. And the Medrash Rabbah occurs. We have it on, of course, the 5 books of Moses. Then we also have it on the Megillot. The Megillot, including the other Megillot, which are in Ksuvim. So you also have a Medrash on Shir HaShirim. So in Shir HaShirim, this is all discussed in the Medrash of Shir HaShirim, where the verse of Basi Lgani occurs. That's where this whole discussion takes place. And in the Medrash, then came Moshe, who was the 7th. And you know what the Medrash says about the 7th? Kol Shavin Chavivin, that the 7th, every 7th, if it's the 7th, it is cherished. the seventh is always cherished. Interesting, right? Like Shabbos, the Shemitah year, etc., right? There are other sevenths that are cherished, but the Medrash throws in that all those who are seventh are cherished, and it's going to be relevant. So that's why I'm emphasizing it here. So Moshe, who is the seventh, drew the revelation of the Shekhinah down once again into the world below. The main step in drawing the down of the Shekhinah was thus taken by Moshe, for it was he who returned the Shekhinah to this world. So just like we were saying with regards to the sin, the most significant sin was the first one, because through the first sin, the Shekhinah departed from this world. So too, when we're talking about the 7 levels of drawing the Shekhinah closer, which was the most significant? The 7th, because through Moshe, the Shekhinah came down. Of course, he couldn't have done it without the 6th, the 5th, etc., and it's the 7th from the first, and all of that, they are all significant. But of primary importance is going to be the 7th level, because now through the 7th, the Shekhinah comes back down into our reality. That's where it belongs. That's what it's all about. So he says, just as the principal stage in the withdrawal and ascent was caused by the tree of knowledge, so too the principal stage in the descent and return of the Shekhinah is accomplished when it comes back down into this world. Apart from the fact that this stage in drawing down of the divine is the one that most affects us, okay, so number one, it's most relevant to us, because if the Shekhinah goes from 4 to 3 and 3 to 2, I say, okay, it's academic. I mean, it's okay, it's a little bit closer, it's a little bit closer. Right? You know, like kids in the car, they're saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Well, we've got 10 minutes to go, right? Well, we've got 5 minutes to go. Okay, both of those things mean the same thing to the child, right? We're not there yet. It's when you finally arrive, at the arrival, that's what it's all about. So number one, it affects us most. So this stage, the Rebbe says, this stage is also objectively the most significant. It's the most significant because the place of the Shekhinah, the desire of the Shekhinah, is to be down here in this physical realm, in this world. That is the desire of the Shekhinah. So going closer and closer and closer is all good and fine and necessary, it's part of the journey. But the most significant is going to be that which is done by the 7th. And it was specifically through Moshe that the Shekhinah was drawn down. The reason being, as explained parenthetically in the Maimer, that all those who are 7th are cherished. We're talking about a lot of spiritual levels, especially last week. We were talking about the levels of the Shekhinah of one level, the Shekhinah of the other level, and then you have the Shekhinah of Atzilut and the Shekhinah that comes after the Tzimtzum in the form of the Kav, the divine vector that reveals into the Makam Panui, into the void that God created, the so-called void. And then the Shekhinah from the highest level of the Or Ein Sof. Now the Rebbe is going to come and make it very, very real to us. And I need to share with you another point over here. And this is going to explain why this is going to be a very significant point in this Maimer, and it has to do with Chassidic history. So, yes, Reb David, please.
The starting point of the Shekhinah leaving was Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
But when you go down the 7 levels to bring it back to Earth, it doesn't go back to Gan Eden. It's still not there yet. Like you know what I'm saying? It didn't return to its original starting point. So what's happening with that?
Gan Eden is a secondary point. The point of Gan Eden is that at that point, it was a point of perfection of the world where Gan Eden was in this world. But the point of the mimer is that is where the divine presence became manifest. So it's not necessarily, at least at this point of my understanding, it wasn't, the significant point over here is not that we need Gan Eden in this world, but that we need the divine presence in this world. And the Gan Eden happened to be how that became manifest. Now,
I get it.
Even when Mashiach comes, I haven't seen a discussion that when Mashiach comes, Gan Eden is going to return to this world. Now, presently, the way we use the word Gan Eden, not in the context of this story, is basically the world of the souls above, right? So it's kind of interesting how the whole idea of Gan Eden has shifted, and what's going to come to the foreground here is really going to be the manifestation of God in this physical realm. So now interestingly, so we have this whole mimer talking about amazing, and to me, I love when you have the history, the story, and the philosophy, and the deep Chassidic meaning all coming together, all converging. So we have the story and the Torah of the divine presence departing, and we have it coming back through, right, which really gives a context to the whole story of the Torah, from the story of the beginning of creation all the way to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and that becomes the launching pad for all of the meaning of what Judaism is all about, right? So this medrash gives meaning to all of that. But out of all of this meaning, the Rebbe is going to focus on one little point here. The Rebbe is going to be focusing on this point. He's already mentioned it a couple times, that the seventh is beloved. You know why the previous Rebbe, was emphasizing the fact that the seventh is beloved? Why was the previous Rebbe emphasizing this? I mean, it seems to be a side point and not directly relevant to the discourse, right? Okay, he's the seventh is beloved. Okay, cute, nice, okay. But why is it so significant? The Rebbe is saying, the Rebbe said this discourse as a welcoming the seventh generation. What do I mean? Just like you have with Abraham, Yitzchok, and Yaakov, then you have when you have dynasties, right? When you have dynasties, lahavdil, you're going to have in the dynasties it becomes only relevant when you have the same name that's used, right? But King Charles is which King Charles? It's King Charles III. But which number is he in this particular dynasty? There's a number. I don't remember what it is. And this dynasty is a particular family of the, of the family of, that comes from Queen Elizabeth's father or grandfather, right? There were the families coming from, or maybe even from Queen Victoria, right? It's a particular segment of monarchs. Why am I talking about this? Why am I talking about monarchs? Because when you have royalty, you have dynasties, and you have one, the second, the third, the fourth, right? We become aware of these numbers only when they take on the same name, right? But nevertheless, there is a dynastic sequence here. So in Chassidic movements as well, you have the founder of the Chassidic movement, and he's going to be the first, and his successor is going to be the second, and his successor is going to be the third. And each of these things are significant, right? When you have a dynasty, where you show up in the pecking order or in the, in the dynastic sequence is going to be significant. And here the Rebbe is going to play on this. He's going to make this of utmost significance. And the Rebbe is going to explain as follows. He says, who was the first Chassidic Rebbe? The first Chabad Rebbe was Rabbi Shneur Zalman. His son was Rabbi Dov Ber. Okay, he's number 2. The third, we learned the discourse before this discourse from the Tzemach Tzedek. That was Rabbi Menachem Mendel, known as the Tzemach Tzedek. He was the son-in-law of Rabbi Dov Ber. and he is number 3. The Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, had many sons, and many of them went on to lead different dynasties. But his youngest son, Rabbi Shmuel, became the 4th Chabad Rebbe. Rabbi Shmuel had a few sons, and his son number 2, Rabbi Shalom Ber, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, became the 5th Chabad Rebbe. And he became the 5th Chabad Rebbe. And he passed away in 1920. So he was the Rebbe all the way through 1920. So through World War I and through the Bolshevik Revolution, Reb Shalom Ber had only one son who we call the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok, right? And he is number 6. Now he passed away. He passed away and he gave a discourse for his passing away, but in his discourse for passing away, he's talking all about which number? The 7th, that the 7th is very significant. You know why? Because the job of the 7th the purpose of the 7th is to bring it home. So all of the other generations brought it closer, 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 but the purpose of the 7th, like we see the 7th in the 7th in the Medrash is talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, right? He was the 7th and he was beloved. But the 7th in the context of our discussion, the Rebbe is saying, although the Rebbe may not say it explicitly, but it's absolutely implied, we are now the 7th generation, the Rebbe is saying. The previous Rebbe, who was the 6th generation of Chabad, he passed away, and now we're the 7th generation. What's the purpose? What's the whole function of the 7th generation? To bring the Shekhinah back down into this world, namely, to put it in other words, to bring Mashiach. The purpose of the 7th generation is to bring Mashiach. Everything was a preparation to this point. And this is what the Rebbe is going to be emphasizing over here. It's quite amazing that the Rebbe in the Maimer, this isn't just a philosophical thing. These are marching orders. This is our spiritual mandate. And so the Rebbe continues in chapter 3. The fact that our sages say that all who are 7th are cherished, they don't say, the fact that our sages say that all those who are 7th are cherished rather than all those who are cherished are 7th, indicates that the 7th quality is in being 7th. In other words, the Rebbe explains, he's not cherished on account of his choice, his desire, his spiritual service, right? There's something that he did. No. You're the 7th, man. You're the 7th. You were born the 7th, and now you got to do the job of the 7th. Don't think that you've got some great spiritual, mystical quality. Wow, you're amazing. No, you know what your quality is? You're the 7th. You got to do the job of being the 7th.
Rabbi.
It was for this, just one second. It was for this reason that it was Moshe who was privileged to have the Torah given through him. And the Rebbe is saying here that his quality was interesting here. This is a very personal mimer. The Rebbe is speaking personally about himself. He's speaking personally about his followers. Please, somebody had a question?
Yes, Rabbi. I'm just curious. Does this extend to to this country too? The secular world. I mean, if it would operate on that madrega for the, for the religious world, I mean, you would think that it would extend to the secular world too, because Hashem has oversight over our what we do here. Now, I was just thinking about the 7th president of the United States, who was Andrew Jackson, and he was the founder of the Democratic Party, so to say. Which is now what we're dealing with today, So, I mean, what do we see as the, as the, from that,
I can tell you with absolute clarity and conviction, I have no idea.
No, I just say,
I would have to say, based on what the Rebbe is saying, if somebody is the seventh, they can take heart in that and know that there's something special simply about being the seventh. But what it has to do with Andrew Jackson, I couldn't tell you. One thing is for sure, we don't know that Andrew Jackson fulfilled his idea of being the seventh. He was quite it was a presidency mired in quite a bit of turmoil and conflict, if I recall correctly. He still ended up on the $20 bill. So, hey. So even if he, so let's put it this way. If the Rebbe says the seventh is significant, right? So the seventh, there's got to be a significance to that. That doesn't mean that everyone's going to rise to the challenge. And the point of the Rebbe is the Rebbe is saying here, anybody who is seventh should rise up and do their job. Yeah, he is. But he was speaking to is, we are now the seventh generation of the Chassidic movement, because the sixth passed away. Now it's a year later. We are the seventh. We have to rise to the challenge of being the seventh. Now, if people want to sit down and figure out the seventh of different things, they're more than welcome. So Moshe, you can come back next week and tell us what you've discovered about the potential of what Andrew Jackson could have accomplished, or what he did accomplish.
Well, I can read to you a little expose of what he did, an overview of what he did, if you just have a minute or so, if you really want to.
A minute or so, please lay it on us.
Okay, Andrew Jackson, who was seventh president of the United States, was the dominant actor in American politics between Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln. Born to secure parents and orphaned in youth, he was the first self-made man and the first Westerner to reach the White House. He became a Democratic symbol and founder of the Democratic Party, the country's most vulnerable political organization. During his two-term presidency, he expanded executive powers and transformed the president's role from chief administrator to popular tribune. And that's just basically a very brief overview of what he did, So.
Interesting.
But he also had a legacy of wiping out many Indian tribes.
Yeah. Yeah. And not being easy to get along with, but anyway, so interesting. So yeah. I mean, advancing executive powers, I don't know, it seems that that's a common thing for presidents to want to do. So I don't know. I still don't have a clarity. I mean, one would have to really study his life and see. So as I said, Moshe, if you want to come back next week and tell us something that you found about his life that accomplished this idea of the seventh being cherished.
Okay, I'll do some more research.
You don't have to. I mean, it's just the Democratic Party, and what the Democratic Party meant back then was quite different than what it means today, right? Just like the Republican Party, and anyway. Let's go forward with the mimer. I'm not gonna take the bait. We're not gonna get mired in politics here, are we? No. All right. So the Rebbe is saying here that it was for this reason that Moshe was privileged to have the Torah given to him. The Rebbe of blessed memory explained soon after arriving in America. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to share the screen. Let me share the screen. That even when we refer to the seventh of a series as being the most cherished, the special quality of the first is apparent. But the whole meaning of seventh is that it's the seventh from the first. The Rebbe then explained the qualities that the first, our forefather Avraham, attained through his spiritual service, which was performed with self-sacrificing devotion with Mesiras Nefesh. Not content with the above, the Rebbe adds, although this is seemingly not relevant to his central theme, that Avraham did not actively pursue Mesiras Nefesh. This is a common thread of the previous Rebbe's discourses, is that there's two different types of self-sacrifice. One level of self-sacrifice is that people who are bent on self-sacrifice. And the previous rabbi, who was a man of self-sacrifice, he says he wasn't so much for that idea of being bent on self-sacrifice. He said the idea is you got to serve God in your situation. And whatever you're called upon to achieve, that's what you're meant to do. And if it's Mesiras Nefesh, it's Mesiras Nefesh. And in this, his service was unlike that of Rabbi Akiva, who did actively saying it. Rabbi Akiva says, he's quoted in the Talmud, when will I be afforded the opportunity for Mesiras Nefesh so that I may actualize it? I mean, this is quite we're not trying to negate Rabbi Akiva, obviously. But it's very interesting because in the previous Rebbe's discourses, he does say, right? So Rabbi Akiva was always seeking and pursuing, he said, and this is what he said in the Shema, in Rabbi Akiva's interpretation of the Shema is, B'chol nafshecha, with all of your nefesh, with all of your life, afilu hu notel es nafshecha, even if he takes your life from you, you still love God. And when he was being brutally, savagely tortured in his execution by the Romans, his skin was being peeled off with rakes with combs of metal, and his students were there with him, and he was smiling, reciting the Shema. He was smiling, and you talk about somebody who is superhuman, right? I mean, and his students said, Rebbe, this far? I mean, I think you're taking this quite to the extreme. And the Rebbe said, my whole life I was waiting. When can I only offer up my life to God? When can I make such a gift of giving my life to God? I shouldn't be happy. This is wonderful. Right? You call Rabbi Akiva while, God forbid, he's going through that terrible, horrific torture. You call him up. Hi, Rabbi Akiva here. Oh, hi, Rabbi Akiva. How you doing? Never better. Never better. It's mind-blowing. There's no way that we can write. And the Arizal explains that Rabbi Akiva had, his soul was a reincarnation of the soul of Cain, the story of Cain and Abel, who had killed his brother. And the only way to elevate that spark of Cain was through self-sacrifice. So for Rabbi Akiva, he actually did need to do this particular service to correct his soul in particular, stemming from Cain. We know that Rabbi Akiva was a son of a convert to Judaism, and his soul was associated with Cain, who killed his brother. And that was what his soul needed. But nevertheless, the Frierdiker Rebbe explains to us that is not for us. We have to have the Mesiras Nefesh of Abraham. What is that? Avram's Mesiras Nefesh, by contrast, was incidental to his actual service. He knew that the main object of divine service was that he proclaimed there the name of God, the Lord of the world. So he had to proclaim God's name in the world. And our sages say, do not read Vayikra, that he proclaimed, but rather Vayakri, that he made others, he caused others to proclaim. That is, let another man likewise proclaim God's name. Okay, it's a play on words in the Hebrew. The Hebrew says, Vayikra Sham b'Shem Hashem kel olam, and he called there in the name of God. And the sages say it wasn't just that he called, but Vayakri, he caused others. He had others. He taught others to call in the name of Hashem. And in the course of his divine service, and in the course if in the course of this service, Mesiras Nefesh was called for, he could supply that too. Indeed, so estimable was Abraham's divine service and his Mesiras Nefesh, his literal self-sacrifice, that even Moshe was privileged to have given the Torah given through him, because he was beloved the seventh to the first. So the Rebbe is pointing out here, don't think that levels 1 through 6 are chopped liver. Don't think that 1 through 6 are incidental. No, they are extremely significant. How did Moshe have this ability, this calling, to now give the Torah because he's cherished, because he's the seventh? Only because he's the seventh from the first. Now, this is, of course, much more relevant when you realize what the Rebbe is saying here is he's talking about himself. You understand? We might look at this and assume, oh, the Rebbe is talking about Moshe coming, from the levels of Abraham. And if you read the discourse simply talking about Abraham being the first and Moshe being the seventh, you're missing the point. You're missing the whole context of this discourse. The Rebbe is talking about that, but the Rebbe is referring to himself. And it is this relationship between them that the sages apply the verse. God told Moshe, do not stand in the place of greats. This is a medrash, and God told Moshe, don't stand in the place of greats. You're not great like Abraham. You know what you are? You're the seventh. It is true that the seventh of a series is very much loved, and that this status comes not as a result of choice, nor as a result of one's divine service, but as a finished product, merely as a result of birth. Nevertheless, there are no inherent limitations that should cause an individual to say that this status is beyond him and that it is accessible only to a select few. In other words, a person can say, the seventh, it's not for me. I don't have the wherewithal. I don't have the spiritual stamina. The Rebbe says, no, you're the seventh. That's just the fact. And on the contrary, this is a situation similar to that which is explained in Tana Devei Eliyahu and quoted in Chassidus, that every Jew, even a slave and a handmaiden, can attain the inspiration of divine spirit. And also every Jew is obligated to say, when will my actions equal those of my forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchok, and Yaakov? Boy, I can say that? Yeah, the Talmud says every Jew can say, when will I reach that? Meaning we all have the spiritual wherewithal. At the same time, we should not delude ourselves. We must know that we should not stand in the place of greats, and that the merit of the seventh of a series consists of as being the seventh to the first. So we have to realize our unbelievable strength, power, and potential, and also to realize it's not you. It's not coming from you. It's because you are the seventh. That is, he is capable of doing the divine service and fulfilling the mission of the first. And what was that, as he said above, with Abraham, not merely that he proclaimed, but that he made others proclaim. This then is why the seventh is so cherished. It is he who draws down the Shekhinah. In fact, the essence of the Shekhinah, the Iker Shekhinah. Moreover, he draws it down into this lowly world. And it is this that is demanded of each and every one of us, of the seventh generation. Now the Rebbe makes it very personal and puts it in words that we cannot misunderstand. Now the Rebbe says, yes, we are the seventh generation. This is what is demanded of each and every one of us of the seventh generation. And Kol Shavin Chavivin, all those who are seventh are cherished. And even though this is not a result of our own choosing and our own service, and indeed in certain ways maybe even contrary to our will, and here the Rebbe seems to be speaking very much personally, because the Rebbe had made very clear that he has no desire to be the Rebbe, and he was compelled to be the Rebbe. So he says it might not even be our own choosing. And indeed, in certain ways, contrary to our will, nevertheless, all those who are seventh are cherished. So here the Rebbe is basically capitulating. He's giving in. He's saying, yes, all right, we are the seventh. Now we have to live up to it. And we are now very near, the approaching steps of Mashiach. Indeed, we are at the conclusion of this period. And our spiritual task is to complete the process of drawing down the Shekhinah. Moreover, the essence of the Shekhinah within, specifically to bring it down into this world. So the Rebbe is now taken this spiritual point, this analysis of the Medrash and the Chassidic perspective, and now he made it very applicable, he made it into a mandate, really, and told his Chassidim, and this is the first discourse of the Rebbe, where he lays it out very clearly. This is our job now. We are the seventh, and we are the ones who are meant to bring it home, to bring the Shekhinah back down into this world, which, as the Rebbe will lay out clearly, but as we already understand, that means bringing Hashem's divine presence back into the Holy of Holies in the temple, in the Holy Temple, in the third Holy Temple. So there we have it. These are the marching orders of the Rebbe. So it's very interesting that we go from the concluding discourse of the previous Rebbe to the first discourse of the Rebbe on this theme. And as I mentioned to you last week, or maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, that the first time that the Rebbe met the previous Rebbe, the first discourse that he heard was this discourse. The Rebbe was saying this discourse, and he was quoting it specifically from Basi Lgani, because it was being quoted in the name of, that there was a son-in-law whose name was Menachem, quoting it from his father-in-law. So it's very interesting that he says specifically this Basi Lgani, just another added interesting point. But any questions or comments?
Yes, it's kind of interesting to speculate whether or not Moshe Rabbeinu had any inkling that he was the seventh in a line, and that he didn't seem to want to engage in Mesiras Nefesh when Hashem approached him to go to Paro.
Right. The Rebbe also did not want to assume this position, and whereas Moshe Rabbeinu stood for 7 days and said, I'm not going to do it, the Rebbe stood for a whole year saying, I'm not going to take this position. Although, truth to be told, Moshe Rabbeinu, God was speaking directly to Moshe. So I think Moshe's denial of doing this was stronger than the Rebbe's, being that Hashem himself was telling him, you got to do it. Moshe said, I'm not going to do it. Nevertheless, we see parallel points here, right? That neither of them wanted to do it. And this is a point made by Aristotle, that a very important component of leadership is that one does not desire to lead. He doesn't have a desire to lord himself over others. As oftentimes people who want to lead, they want to be in control, right? That's not a good quality to have for a leader.
And both Moshe and the Rebbe were leaders of their generation.
Yeah. So there we have it.
Right.
Kyle, thank you, Rabbi.
With Moshe, Hashem told him, somebody's got their speaker on. So he has, so my voice is coming out.
I think I hear you.
Okay, you're on now? Okay, you got me now?
Yes.
Okay, so with Moshe, he had Hashem telling him to do it.
Yeah.
But Rebbe had his wife telling him that he better do this, otherwise my father's work is for naught.
Well, that was the final straw, right? Those were the final words from his wife where he decided, okay, I've got to do this. But that was kind of at the end of this year. So, all right, we'll discuss more next week, God willing. Everybody stay well. Have a wonderful week. And hopefully we should all, by next week, Mashiach should be here, and we're all going to say, that's what the Rebbe meant in the Maimer, the discourse, bringing the Shekhinah back down into the world. We're going to go, aha, we've got it. All right. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Like isn't.